In this tutorial, we're going to create a JavaScript countdown. This is going to be a function that's going to allow us to pass in a few parameters. The first parameter you can see is a human readable date, so that's extremely useful to be able to pass in something like that. And we're also going to pass in a list of, or an array of elements that are to be affected on our page. So you can see here that each of these corresponds to the markup I've created up here. So we, in this instance, are counting down days, hours, minutes, and seconds, and we've defined these all in here. The reason for this is there's no point updating data that you don't need to or that isn't there. Lastly, we have a callback function, which can obviously be defined as an anonymous function, as you can see here, or it could be a named function that you want to reference to be called when this finishes. So let's take a look at how this works. Let's just open a browser and refresh here. So you can see that we've got the different sets of timers here. So we've got days, hours, minutes, and seconds, and we can quite clearly see that we've defined a time of 6:30 p.m. on today's date, which leaves us with 52 minutes and 6 seconds as we speak. So this is what we're going to be creating. It relies on no external JavaScript libraries, so we're not using anything like jQuery. It's going to be extremely lightweight and easy to manage and easy to change around. And the way that we're going to do this is with a global function, which could be become part of your application's overall object under that namespace. Or you could, of course, just take this functionality and put it into your page as you wish, depending on how you feel about global functions. So let's go ahead and get started and wipe this slate clean and start working on the markup. Okay, so for the benefit of those just starting out in JavaScript, we're going to do this from scratch, essentially. So we can already see that we're working with two files. These are countdown.js and countdown.html. Countdown.js is where our main function is going to be included. So I'm actually just going to, first of all, go ahead and include this onto the page. So I'm just going to use script tags with a source attribute, and I'm just going to specify countdown.js that I want to load in. And the next thing I'm going to do is open and close some script tags here, because in here, this is where we're actually going to call our function. So let's go ahead and just call this anyway, and then we'll start to add our parameters to it. Now, in terms of the markup, we need 4 elements, and these are just going to be span elements. However, they could be any element type that you want, as long as you can set the inner HTML of these elements. So I'm going to give these all IDs that correspond to what they are. So in this case, we're going to have days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So let's just duplicate these down. So we've got hours, minutes, and seconds. So on the markup side of things, we're all done. What we now need to do is jump over to countdown.js and start to actually build our countdown functionality. So the first thing to do is just declare the name of this function and then outline the function like this. So we are naming the function here in a variable and assigning this function to it, rather than saying something like function countdown. And like I said before, if you do have an overall application object, you can add this method, if you like, to it. So let's create a few variables. The reason we want to do this is because we want to establish how we actually calculate minutes, hours, and days, and obviously seconds based on the time that we're given. Now this is actually extremely straightforward, and I'm going to use underscores to represent these numbers just to keep them separate to other things that we're going to be working with, like timers. It just means that when we scan our code, we can see where we're doing the most calculation. So a second is obviously 1000 milliseconds. And now let's go ahead and work out what a minute is. This should be quite obvious. It's second times 60. Now you can see here I've created one variable, if you like, but I'm actually comma separating these. So we are creating more than one variable here. We're just not defining var each time we want to create a new variable. So an hour is going to be a minute times 60. Again, fairly straightforward. And a day is going to equal an hour, and you probably already guessed, times 24. Now I'm going to come down a couple of lines and I'm going to define the end date that we have in goal. Now, where are we getting this date from? Well, when we looked at our example, we defined a date just in here, and that represented a sort of readable date that we want to count down to. So in this case, that's what it's going to look like. So if we define this as a parameter here, we can call that something like end. Now, to work out the end date, we need to create a new date object in JavaScript. So I'm going to redefine this variable and I'm going to say new date end. So I'm passing in what we pass from here to this, this date object that we're creating. Now we need two more variables. One of them is going to be the timer, and the next one is actually going to be the calculate function that we use to calculate everything and spit everything out. We're only going to use one function here just so we can fill in the contents and focus on the code rather than splitting this up into bite-sized functions, if you like. So I'm going to call this calculate, and I'm going to make that equal to a function. And that's it. That's all we need to do for now. We have our end date, we have our timer ready for when we want to set a timer, and we've got our calculate function. So I'm going to go ahead and call the calculate function from just down here. And in here, for now, I'm just going to console log something out. So we'll console log our end just to see how this line performs. So let's go ahead and run this in the browser and see what happens. Lovely. So we've now passed in our human readable date, and we've been presented with this. Now with this might look a little strange, but we're going to be able to determine how we want to work with the now value. We can check if it's not a number, so we know it's an invalid date, etc., etc. So in actual fact, that's probably the first thing that we might want to do here. So inside of our calculate function, we might want to create an if statement just to check whether we have a valid date or not. So let's go ahead and create that if statement, and we're going to use the is not a number function. So nan is not a number. You might have commonly seen this in sort of anything that calculates with numbers in JavaScript. You might have seen this appear on a website somewhere. You get an nan value back and you think, wow, what is that? But basically it just means that it's not a number. So we pass in end there, and we want to check whether this is a number or not, and we want to say console.log if it is not a number. So I'm going to use an exclamation mark there to check if this is false, and in this case I'm going to say invalid date time. Perfect. So what I'm then going to do is I'm going to just return. We don't want anything else to run if we have an invalid date. There's no need to. So let's go ahead and check this out in our browser. So if we just refresh, it says invalid date time. Oh, sorry. I've actually gone ahead and added a false check there when it's not needed. Quite confusing with JavaScript. If you were to say is not a number, we want to say if it is a number or not. Anyway, let's go ahead and define a few more variables that we need to work with. Now, when we're counting down, we need to check if we have, we need to check and compare against the current date. So I'm going to create a variable called now, and I'm going to set that equal to a new date object, which is going to return us with the current date. I'm then going to create a variable called remaining, and this is going to be equal to end.getTime, and that's a method, minus now.getTime, again, method. I'm also then going to define a variable called data. Now this data variable is going to be where we store. We're basically going to build up an object of the days, hours, minutes, seconds values that we want to return and then display on the page. So it's just sort of like we want to use this at some point, but we're going to declare it here anyway. So let's go ahead and continue with this. The first thing that we really need to do is check if there is any time remaining on this timer. Now we can do that by checking if the remaining time that we've just calculated here is equal to is less than or equal to 0. If it's less than or equal to 0, there's no need to start applying numbers to the area on our page here. So by default we'll have double zeros just here to signify that. So that will now look like this. So if the time has passed already, there's no need to even begin our timer, start counting down any functionality. It would be a complete waste of resource. So let's go ahead and check this. So if remaining is less than or equal to 0, what do we want to do? Well, we want to basically call our callback. But we'll get to that in just a moment. So here we'll just put a comment and say callback. And what we're also going to want to do is clear our timer. So we want to clear our timer at some point. We want to clear our timer, we want to call back, and that's it really. So otherwise we want to go ahead and check if our timer isn't set and then set our timer otherwise. So here I'm going to say if not timer. So if our timer hasn't been set, I'm going to set our timer to, using the set interval function, we're going to the function that we're going to run is calculate, and we're going to run that every second. So we've already defined how many milliseconds are in a second here, so we don't need to specify 1,000 here. We can just use the variable we've already created. So what we're going to do now is we're going to down here console log second. Now what's going to happen here, let's just run over the code we've already written. We're already running our calculate function, so that's going to run this function. We're going to calculate the current date and time using the date object in JavaScript. We're going to calculate the remaining time, check if the date's valid. Assuming that it is, we go on to this part of our code, and we're going to check if we have any remaining time left. So as long as the counter or the current time hasn't passed the time that we want, we're going to go ahead and set our timer. Otherwise we're going to do something else, but we'll get to that a bit later on. So when I refresh now, you'll see that this count every second, and you can see that Chrome, the console here, is just adding a number on for the same output. So every second, this is just outputting second. Very, very straightforward. So what we now want to do is, instead of this useless functionality here, we want to build up a object of data that we want to output. So we're going to do all of our calculations, then we're going to go on and check if our elements that we've defined here actually exist. And remember, we're going to define them in an array just here, and we're then going to loop through each of the elements and put the inner HTML to the value that we've supplied. So the data variable that we defined here is going to be an object, and in here we're going to have lots of different the things that we want to calculate basically. So we're going to have days, and similarly hours, minutes and seconds. So hours, minutes and seconds. So here what we're going to do is the days is going to be the remaining time divided by a day. And what we want to do is we want to use the floor method on the math object in JavaScript to floor this, basically round it down. So that's what math.floor does. For the other calculations, we want to say, let's put these in brackets, remaining mod day over hour. And again, for all that, we want to do a math.floor on that. And again, remaining mod hour. And then we want to divide that by the minute value. And again, we'll just encase these in brackets so we know what's going on. Also makes it a little easier to read. And for seconds, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. I'm sure you'll notice a pattern, remaining mod minute over second. And just make sure our brackets line up there. Yep, we've got a set in here and a set out here. Perfect. So we've now created, or calculated rather, our data. And I'm a fan of the console. It just makes it a lot easier to work. So I'm going to go ahead and console log this out every second. So let's take a look at this. You can clearly see here that these values are changing in our console as we output them. So every time we're counting down, you can see these basically changing. So you can see the seconds counting down here. In fact, it looks like the minute... No, it looks like it hasn't been calculated properly. So let's go ahead and just check if we haven't done anything wrong. Yes, here we go. So we have a day equals an hour equals 24 here. So I'm sure someone spotted that before I did. But there we go. That's gone ahead and changed now. So yep, this is the rubbish we've output. But now we've got a more accurate picture here. So we've got 35 minutes each time we loop. And then for the seconds, these obviously will have one removed from them each time, so they'll decrement down, obviously until seconds reaches 0, and then minutes is then going to go down as well. So they're the calculations that we've already done. The next thing to do, however, is to actually loop through the elements that we want to apply these to, and then we can actually put the values on the screen for the user to see. So you can see that now the 34 has changed in the minute value here, and 59, or the seconds have been reset to 59. Okay, so let's jump back over to our code. Instead of console.log data, what we're going to do is we're going to check if our elements have been defined. So they haven't at the moment, so I'm going to say if elements.length. Now, length is a property of an array that tells you how many items are in the array, and at the moment there are no items in this array, so this is going to be false. So let's go ahead and do so. So days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Cool. So now that we've done that, what do we actually want to do? Like, what are we trying to achieve here? Well, the point of this is we want to basically loop through all of the elements that we've defined here, and then find them on the page, and then set their value to what we've defined just here. So let's go ahead and do this now. We want to say for x in elements. So we're now looping through each of the elements. Now, this code assumes that you're always going to call the ID here days, hours, minutes, and seconds. This is just a representation of what you want to show. So you couldn't, for example, say days with a Z and then change this to days. That wouldn't work. So let's go ahead and change that. Now, the reason for this is, if we just pop back to countdown.js, is that we have called days here, hours here, minutes here, seconds here. This could be changed, of course, so perhaps it's something to go away and change if you really need that flexibility. So inside here, I'm going to define a variable called x, and this is going to be the position of the elements at x. So here, I'm just going to say elements x. Now I'm going to say document.get element by ID, define x, and then say .inner HTML equals data x. So that basically just replaces the values on our page. Let's go ahead and check this out in our browser. Oh, okay, elements is not defined. There we go. That's the problem that we've got, is that we haven't actually set this in our list of arguments or parameters that we want to pass through to our function. So this will be elements. Let's go ahead and refresh. And there we go. Now, this looks very strange. The reason being is that we don't actually have double digits on here where we might want to see double digits. It's still fine when we have values like this, but you can see these have turned to single zeros, and that's to be expected just because of the way that we've done our calculations. Now, if we wanted to change that, there's a really short way of doing this. We just say data x is equal to, so we're sort of replacing this data, and what we want to do is we want to say 000, we want to concatenate that onto data x, and then we want to slice it -2. Now what this is going to do is it's going to add it's going to add zeros on and then cut it by 2, leaving you with either 2 digits if there was 1, or nothing if there was 2. So let's go ahead and check this out. When we refresh, we can see here, oh, okay. Let's just check this error out. Yes, of course. So what we've done here is I've misplaced the brackets. So if I just get rid of that, like that, perfect. So just goes to show you, if you misplace your brackets by accident, things go wrong. So now we've got double digits, which is perfect. So the last thing that we've got to do now is we have to clear our timer if we finish the countdown, if it reaches 0, and we've also got to call our callback. Let's go ahead and define the callback in our list, in our argument list here, or parameter list, just so we don't forget. And let's go ahead and define this here. So I'm going to create a function here. In fact, let me just pull this across so it's a little bit easier to read. And here I'm going to console log finished. Perfect. So now what we want to do is we want to clear the timer here if this gets to 0. So we say clear interval, and we know what the timer is called. It's called timer, and callback as well. So what we want to do is we want to check if this callback is actually a function, because we don't want to go ahead and run it if it isn't a function. So we create an if statement. We're going to say if type of, and this is really, really odd if you're not used to JavaScript, but this is how we're going to check the type of this item that we've passed. So we want to say type of callback, so this. If type of callback is a function. Now the odd thing about this is that we define this in a string. For example, if it hadn't been defined, it would be undefined like this. So in this case, we're checking if it's a function, and if that is a case, if that is the case, we're just going to call callback. So very, very straightforward. So let's go ahead and refresh. We've still got 28 minutes, so I'm not going to make you sit for 28 minutes and wait till this counts down. So let's go ahead and just match this up with the time that we're on at the moment. So let's put this to 2:10 and refresh. So we've got about 30 seconds to wait. In fact, let's just put this down a little more. There we go. There we go. So we've got 20 seconds to wait. As expected, when we get to 0, we're going to wait an additional second, then run our callback. So that's, I guess, a downside of the way that we've written this, is it's going to take an extra second to perform the callback. But if you want to, again, make this more precise, go ahead and do that. So there we go, and then we run the callback. So it now says finished. Now we can see a little problem here, and we're still calculating things even if we don't need them. So for example, here you can see that we're saying if remaining is less than or equal 0, else set the timer. Now otherwise, we want to calculate our data. If we don't have any time remaining, we don't want to calculate our data. So that was misplaced. If we place this in here and just properly indent that, you'll see that if we make a slight change to this and then refresh, we'll get we won't get this -1 problem crop up again. So let's just wait for this to count down. When we get to 0, we wait an additional second. The countdown is the timer is removed, and then we have our callback performed here. So the very, very last thing I want to show you is that we don't actually have to provide an anonymous function here. We can, of course, say var callback function equals function console.log done. And then instead of passing this anonymous function, we could, of course, just say callback function. So it really depends on how you want to structure your application. But overall, that is how we would create a JavaScript countdown timer without the use of any external JavaScript libraries.